General Hospital spoilers reveal that in recent weeks, the tension surrounding Alexis has shifted into an entirely new and far more dangerous register, marking one of the most dramatic adjustments to her character arc in years. What began as a concerned aunt and grandmother stepping into delicate family matters has spiraled into something far more disturbing, a pattern of increasingly unrestrained actions that place her own desires and sense of authority above the autonomy and stability of those around her. At the center of it all are Scout and Danny, two children whose futures have become pawns in a conflict that Alexis insists is about protection, but which many in Port Charles, and many more watching from home, now believe is really about control. The trouble started quietly enough, almost imperceptibly at first. When Alexis inserted herself into conversations about Drew's future plans for Scout. Her tone was urgent, her rhetoric framed around safeguarding the child's well-being. But the subtext was unmistakable. Alexis did not trust Drew to make those decisions without her approval. This distrust didn't arise from any recent betrayal or tangible danger, at least none that could be proven, but from a deeper, more primal belief that her instincts trumped everyone else's. With Danny, the situation was even more layered. While she maintained that her involvement was purely to ensure his emotional stability and continued access to his extended family, her actions revealed something much less altruistic, a refusal to accept that, as children grow, they need to forge their own identities independent of adult agendas. Observers began noticing subtle but telling shifts in her demeanor. The conversations she initiated became less about listening and more about issuing directives. Decisions that should have been collaborative discussions were presented as fait accompli. It wasn't just that Alexis wanted a voice in what happened next, she wanted the voice, the final word. The unquestioned authority. And when challenged, whether by Drew, by other members of the Corinthos or Quartermain families, or by friends who sensed the creeping possessiveness, her reactions were sharp, defensive, and laced with an almost combative energy. From there, the pattern only escalated. Alexis began making choices that were not only unilateral but also impulsive, bypassing the necessary conversations that might have tempered her instincts. She would insert herself into meetings she hadn't been invited to, quietly alter arrangements that others had agreed upon, and deliver scathing moral judgments about anyone whose perspective didn't align with hers. What unsettled people most was not just the content of her objections but the intensity with which she delivered them, an intensity that bordered on obsession. The more she fought to assert her dominance in decisions about Scout and Danny, the more her reasoning seemed to blur, tangled up with personal grievances that had little to do with the children themselves. This darker shift in Alexis's character has not gone unnoticed by the audience. Longtime viewers, many of whom once sympathized with her struggles, have begun to voice frustration and even outright condemnation on social media. They point to her recent history, the hypocrisy of holding others to standards she herself has repeatedly violated, as evidence that her moral authority has eroded. In this latest situation, those criticisms have only intensified. Posts dissecting her decisions rack up hundreds of comments, with fans debating whether Alexis's interference is motivated by genuine care or by a deeper, more troubling need to control the narrative of her own family. What makes the backlash more potent is the sense that Alexis's recent behavior mirrors her own most damaging patterns from the past. This isn't the first time she has been accused of prioritizing her will over the emotional needs of those she claims to protect. Her complicated romantic history, her repeated entanglements in other people's relationships, and her tendency to view the world in terms of her own moral calculations, all of these old wounds have been reopened in the court of public opinion. Many are now asking, if Alexis cannot recognize the parallels between her current crusade and the mistakes that have cost her dearly before, how can she hope to break free from them? Within the fictional world of Port Charles, the consequences of her actions are beginning to crystallize. Her relationships with key figures, Jason, Drew, and others who have influence over Scout and Danny's lives, are fraying under the weight of mistrust. Each confrontation leaves new scars, and each power play deepens the divide. Drew, already under scrutiny for his own questionable choices, has shown flashes of both defiance and exhaustion when dealing with Alexis. The prospect of a legal battle over custody arrangements looms large, not because either party wants to hurt the children, but because neither seems willing to relinquish the upper hand. Alexis's methods have also grown more brazen. Rumors swirl that she has begun gathering information behind the scenes, selectively speaking to acquaintances who might reinforce her version of events. Downplaying facts that don't serve her narrative, and even hinting at legal maneuvers that could tilt the balance in her favor. These whispers feed into the growing perception that Alexis's crusade is no longer about preventing harm but about securing dominance. The more she digs in, the more it appears that compromise is off the table entirely. The darkness creeping into her storyline is as much psychological as it is situational. Alexis's fixation on control over Scout and Danny seems to have become a proxy for other unresolved conflicts, a way to reassert agency in a life where she has often felt at the mercy of chaos. Yet, in doing so, she risks alienating the very people she insists she is protecting. Each controlling move, each moralizing speech, pushes her further into the role of antagonist. Not just in Drew's story but in her own. For the audience, this shift is both compelling and infuriating. They are watching a character they have known for years lean into her worst impulses. Perhaps unaware of how far she has strayed from the principles she once claimed to uphold. The more Alexis doubles down, the less room there is for reconciliation, and the more fans wonder if the writers are steering her toward an eventual reckoning. Will she be forced to confront the hypocrisy in her actions? Will someone in her inner circle stage an intervention, or will the breaking point come only after a public and humiliating defeat? In the meantime, the criticism continues to mount. Viewers dissect her every scene, pulling apart lines of dialogue for signs of self-awareness, or the lack thereof. They note the moments where she seems to relish the discomfort of her opponents, where the satisfaction of winning an argument appears to outweigh any concern for how the fallout might affect Scout or Danny. Some interpret this as a conscious transformation, a deliberate embrace of a more Machiavellian side, while others see it as an unspooling, a slow descent into a place where Alexis can no longer distinguish between what is best for the children and what is best for her own ego. The longer this continues, the higher the stakes become. In soap opera storytelling, the children at the center of such disputes are often symbolic. They represent legacy, continuity, and the emotional heart of a family. By making Scout and Danny the focal point of her latest crusade, Alexis has ensured that every move she makes will carry extra weight, both in the eyes of the other characters and in the hearts of the audience. That weight could either ground her in a moment of clarity, forcing her to step back before she causes irreparable harm, or it could pull her deeper into a role she can never quite escape, that of the family member who loves fiercely but wields that love like a weapon. For now, Alexis's trajectory is unmistakably darkening. The adjustments to her storyline have reframed her not as a flawed hero struggling to do the right thing, but as a driven, unyielding force whose grip on the moral high ground is slipping fast. In trying to secure what she sees as her rightful influence over Scout and Danny's lives, she may well lose the trust, respect, and affection that once defined her place in Port Charles. Whether she can recognize that in time, and whether she even wants to, may be the real question that defines this next chapter of her story. Alexis is standing at the edge of one of the most volatile chapters of her life, fully prepared to launch herself into a relentless and deeply personal battle against Drew. What could have remained a tense disagreement over family matters has instead been transformed into a calculated, almost consuming obsession. One that is beginning to erode any semblance of balance or restraint she once had. This is not simply about differing opinions on what is best for Scout or Danny anymore. It is about Alexis asserting her dominance, protecting what she believes is hers to control, and refusing to yield even when the situation demands compromise. Every action she takes seems designed to provoke, every word she speaks layered with an intensity that leaves little room for reconciliation. This shift has created an unmistakable ripple effect in Port Charles, where allies are becoming harder to find and the opposition is growing more determined. Drew, for his part, has become increasingly defensive, bracing for impact with each new move Alexis makes. But the drama has now extended far beyond the fictional streets of the show's setting. The audience, long a mixture of devoted supporters and patient critics, has reached a breaking point. Viewers who once forgave Alexis's missteps as part of her flawed humanity are now finding it impossible to justify her actions. Her fixation on undermining Drew is seen by many as petty, vindictive, and self-serving, rather than as a genuine fight for justice or protection. Nancy Lee Grahn's portrayal, though still layered with the charisma and sharp delivery that have defined Alexis for decades, is being pulled into the undertow of audience dissatisfaction. Social media platforms, fan forums, and comment sections are filled with heated debates. Many of them no longer about the character's fictional motives but about the actor's creative choices and the direction the writers have taken. Has Alexis become irredeemable? Or is this simply a calculated step in a long-term redemption arc? The uncertainty has fueled frustration, and the tone of online discourse has shifted from speculation to outright calls for change. What makes this backlash more potent is that it is not born from a single controversial decision, but from an accumulation of moments where Alexis seemed to disregard empathy, self-awareness, and accountability. She interrupts, she dictates, she rewrites the rules to suit her narrative. And in doing so, she has also alienated a portion of the audience, who now view her less as a complex, relatable figure and more as a cautionary tale of unchecked ego and stubborn pride. The whispers of a boycott are no longer subtle. They have become a rallying cry in certain corners of the fandom, with some viewers openly stating they will stop watching until the character's trajectory changes. This sentiment is not universal. Alexis still has her defenders, who argue that soap operas thrive on flawed characters making disastrous choices, but the polarization is sharper than it has been in years. What is undeniable is that this storyline has become one of the most talked about developments on General Hospital, both for the fictional stakes it sets and for the real-world reaction it has provoked. The new obsession that Alexis has developed toward defeating Drew is, in many ways, a double-edged sword. In the narrative, it provides fertile ground for conflict, betrayal, and unexpected alliances. But in the meta-narrative, the relationship between the show and its viewers, it risks severing the trust that keeps audiences invested. If the writers lean too far into making Alexis the villain without offering moments of vulnerability or redemption, the backlash may only deepen. Conversely, if they pull her back too abruptly, the storyline could lose its weight and momentum. For now, Alexis's descent into this darker, more unyielding version of herself is one of the defining arcs on the canvas. A storyline that is as much about the consequences of obsession as it is about the specifics of custody battles and family politics. The question is no longer whether she will win against Drew in the immediate sense, but whether the cost of victory, both within the story and in the court of public opinion, will leave her with anything worth protecting. And as the weeks unfold, the tension continues to mount. Will Alexis recognize that her grip on this fight is driven more by personal vendetta than by genuine care? Will Drew find a way to turn public sympathy in his favor? And perhaps most importantly, will the fans' growing impatience harden into lasting resentment, or will a well-crafted twist be enough to pull them back into Alexis's corner? Until those questions are answered, one thing remains certain: the battle lines have been drawn, and neither side seems willing to retreat. Alexis, in what is shaping up to be the most desperate and defining chapter of her life, has set her sights on a single, unshakable goal: stopping Scout from leaving Port Charles for Washington, D.C. This is not a measured legal maneuver or a quiet family negotiation. It is a relentless, all-consuming fight that has stripped away any pretense of diplomacy. Every fiber of her being is now locked on preventing this move, and in doing so, she has thrown herself into a storm of emotional, moral, and physical stakes that threaten to overwhelm everyone involved. What makes this moment even more powerful, and tragic, is that Alexis's crusade is unfolding under the looming shadow of her own mortality. Whispers of her declining health, of a possible terminal diagnosis, have begun to circulate quietly through her closest circles. Whether these fears are rooted in truth or in the heightened emotions of those watching her, they have transformed her battle into something far more urgent and volatile. Each word she speaks to keep Scout in Port Charles feels weighted with finality, as though every plea, every demand, could be her last. And as she pushes herself harder, pouring what may be the last reserves of her strength into this cause, the toll on her body and mind grows unmistakable. But in the midst of this battle, a deeper and more dangerous consequence has begun to take root, the shifting of Scout's heart. What Alexis sees as a protective act is being internalized by Scout in a far more personal and explosive way. To Scout, Drew is no longer just her father. He is the man attempting to pull her away from the person she loves most, at the very moment that person might be slipping away forever. In her eyes, Drew's decision to move to DC becomes more than a relocation. It becomes the very thing that could cost her precious time with Alexis, time that can never be regained. That perception quickly hardens into resentment, and resentment into something more dangerous, a deep and searing hatred. The emotional stakes shift dramatically when this animosity begins to define Scout's interactions with Drew. Simple conversations become arguments. And moments that should have been chances for connection turn into battles of loyalty. Each attempt Drew makes to justify his choice is filtered through Scout's grief and fear, turning his words into weapons that wound instead of heal. Soon, he is no longer just in a custody dispute, he is in a war for his child's trust and love, a war he is perilously close to losing. For Drew, this is a nightmare he never anticipated. His plans for DC, which he once framed as a fresh start for Scout, are now seen by her as acts of betrayal. In the court of public opinion, the optics are even worse. He is pitted against a woman whose health may be failing, fighting for a move that many now view as selfish or ill-timed. His intentions, no matter how he frames them, are overshadowed by the perception that he is tearing Scout away from Alexis during a moment when family unity should matter most. The whispers grow louder, and the sympathy that might once have been his shifts toward Alexis, whose defiance in the face of both illness and family opposition paints her as a tragic hero to some and an obstinate manipulator to others. Within Port Charles, the fallout is seismic. Friends and allies begin to take sides, and the tension seeps into every corner of Alexis's world. Some rally behind her, seeing her fight as a mother's and grandmother's duty to protect the bonds that matter most. Others, though sympathetic to her condition, question whether her relentless opposition to Drew is really about Scout's well-being or about Alexis's inability to let go. And beneath it all, Alexis herself seems to be walking a line between righteous determination and self-destructive obsession. Her tone grows sharper, her demands more inflexible, and the space for compromise all but vanishes. The more this plays out, the more the story becomes about far more than a custody battle or a relocation. It becomes a portrait of a woman confronting her own mortality by trying to control the one thing she feels she can, the future of the child she loves. Yet in doing so, she risks inflicting the very kind of emotional wounds she claims she is fighting to prevent. Scout's growing anger toward Drew is not a side effect Alexis anticipated. It is becoming the driving force of the conflict itself, reshaping family dynamics in ways that may never be undone. For the audience, this is both riveting and deeply unsettling. Watching Scout's relationship with Drew deteriorate under the weight of grief and manipulation is as heartbreaking as it is compelling. The transformation of Scout from a child caught in the middle to a young person actively taking sides adds a layer of danger to the storyline, because once that trust is broken, it is far harder to rebuild than to preserve. Many fans see this as one of the most shocking turns in recent memory. Not only for the raw emotional stakes but for the way it has turned beloved relationships into battlegrounds. Alexis's arc, too, has grown darker. Once seen as a flawed but fundamentally principled force, she is now a figure driven by urgency, fear, and a refusal to yield. Whether viewers interpret her actions as noble or selfish, there is no denying the complexity of the moment. If she wins, it may be at the cost of her own health and the emotional stability of the people she loves. If she loses, she may spend the rest of her life haunted by the belief that she failed to protect Scout when it mattered most. And through it all, the specter of her possible death hangs heavy over every choice, every confrontation. It casts her fight in tragic tones, adding to the sense that this is more than just another chapter in the ongoing saga of Port Charles. It is the possible closing act of a character whose journey has always been defined by her fierce love and her equally fierce flaws. In the weeks to come, the question will not only be whether Alexis can stop Scout from leaving, but whether the damage done in this fight can ever be repaired. Even if she succeeds in keeping Scout close, the emotional scars may prove deeper than anyone expected, and the hatred between Scout and Drew could become a legacy all its own. And if Alexis does not survive long enough to see the aftermath, that bitterness could solidify into a lasting rift, shaping the next generation of drama in ways neither side could have foreseen. This is the kind of storyline that changes everything, for the characters, for the families, and for the fans who have followed them for years. It is as much about the cost of love as it is about the fight to keep it, and as Alexis steps into what could be her final battle. The entire town, and the entire audience, is holding its breath to see which will triumph, her determination, or the consequences of it.